everyone. Happy Thursday. I'm excited to introduce Susanne Jones, who is the curator and author of HERstory Quilts, a celebration of strong women. I sat down with Susanne to talk about this amazing exhibit, which is on display this week at our Spring Quilt Festival online. But more about that right after this message.
Welcome, quilters. We hope you've been enjoying the new online Quilt Fest experience. Why OLQF is free and open to the public, the team at Mancuso Show Management have put countless hours into getting everything just right. To help keep the online Quilt Fest and, when the time is right, our in-person events up and running, we are asking for a suggested admission of just $10. We've placed a link to our suggested admission page right here in the description of this video. You are free to leave more if desired, but we truly appreciate anything you can send. Thank you so much for being here with us, and we hope you are staying safe and healthy while enjoying online Quilt Fest.
I've had the pleasure to work with Susanne Jones on several of her exhibits, and her story is definitely one of my favorite exhibits. It features women who have made an impact on this world throughout history, and definitely the women featured in the quilts are my heroes. I hope you enjoy my interview with Susanne. Hi, Susanne. Thank you so much for joining us today. How are you?
I'm fine. Thanks for having me, Diana.
So where are you zooming from?
I'm just west of Washington, D.C. in Virginia, about 30 minutes if there's no traffic from the nation's capital.
Oh, nice. I went to college at Mary Washington College in Fredericksburg. Maybe you've heard of that.
Oh, absolutely. You'd be about an hour from me.
Nice. Well, we're so glad to have you during our live Spring Quilt Festival online. Why don't you start a little bit about telling us about your background?
Okay, well, I haven't moved very far from where I was born. I was born in Washington, D.C. I was an only child, and my grandmother, my father's mother, taught me how to sew when I was a really little girl. And I'm quite sure the first project that I remember doing with her was a shirt for my dad for his birthday. And I'm quite sure that all I did was the very straight side seam, up to from the sleeve down to the hem or something like that. And that she did the whole rest of it. But of course, she told my dad that I had made the whole thing. And that was very encouraging.
I bet he was so proud of that shirt too.
When he died at the age of 75 and I was cleaning out his closet, it was still there.
Oh, that's so nice.
I'm really sorry I didn't save it. And I don't know why I didn't. Maybe my mother was making the decisions and but after it was gone, I was sorry about that,
Right.
He was proud of it. I went to college and became a teacher. I taught elementary school for 25 years. I have 2 children, a daughter and a son, and I have 3 grandchildren, a granddaughter and 2 grandsons. And life is good.
Well, that's great to hear. I always like to hear that from our interviewees, that life is good. Well, so how did you get into the world of quilting and textile arts?
Interestingly enough, one of my really good friends at church was Lisa Ellis, who was the former president of SACWA and the owner of Sacred Threads. When I first knew her, she was neither of those. But we went to the same church and I was getting ready to retire and we were chatting. And I said, the thing I'm going to really miss, besides the children, of course, is all the women that I spend my days with, because you go to lunch every day and there's all these women to talk to. And I said, I'm just going to really miss all those close friendships. She said, do you sew? And I said, yeah. She said, then you should become a quilter, because then you can join a guild and then you will have all these women friends. And she said, and quilters, she said, are the most amazing, wonderfully generous people on the planet.
That is so true.
It is. So I took her advice, and that summer she had me come over and she told me what to buy. I didn't know what a fat quarter was, but she told me to go and buy, some fat quarters. And I went over and I picked out my fabrics, and I brought them to Lisa. And I thought I was just going to pick up her sewing machine. She had a 630 Bernina, and she was going to loan it to me. And I thought I was just going to borrow that machine, and she was going to tell me what to do with my fabric. But I was there actually, I think about 8 hours. Oh, and wow. In that time, she taught me how to cut out, how to do a 1/4-inch seam, how to press the seam, how to do sashing, how to do borders, everything.
That's nice. That's very amazing.
Oh, it was an amazing day. And so those tops are still flimsies. They've, of course, never become anything but a UFO, because that's what we do as quilters. We have all these UFOs, and it takes an act of Congress or better to get them finished sometimes.
Right.
So, yeah, I started doing that, thinking that I would be a traditional quilter, and that I would make lap quilts and baby quilts and that kind of thing.
But you started art quilting about a year ago.
No, I started art quilting a year, well.
Oh, no, not a year ago. I'm sorry.
That's okay. I started art quilting in 2013.
Got it.
And the reason that happened was, again, because of Lisa. She always tells me what I should, she gives me advice. Mm-hmm. And that's the secret of my success in life, is doing what people advise me to do. And so she told me I should join the Quilt Alliance. And the Quilt Alliance, preserves the story of quilters and their quilts. And so I joined the Quilt Alliance, and they had this contest, and the contest was for their 20th anniversary. And so I made a quilt called Seeing Our Stories Clearly with 2020 Hindsight. But it was because I was going on a retreat, and I thought, what project am I going to take? And I thought, well, what the heck? I'll try an art quilt. I'm not going to be any good at this, but I'll try it. And I'll send this in for that contest. And it was just the kind of thing that I really didn't expect much success with. Well, I won a judge's choice from Marianne Fonz, which,
congratulations.
Well, thank you. That was very exciting. Mm-hmm. And then I had to make another art quilt, which you see behind me, that green one. I had to make another one for our committee quilt, because she invited me that year to be a member of the Sacred Threads committee. And the Sacred Threads show is actually held at my church, just by accident. Has nothing to do with me, has to do with the location being in the right place. So I made a committee quilt for that. And then I met Donna DeSoto, and my very first quilt that was published in a book was Rain. And that's
what we're showing now, I believe.
Okay. Yeah. And a yellow umbrella with lots of rain coming down. That was a fun thing, because Donna came in, and they were all handing in their Beatles quilts, all the committee members. And I didn't know what they meant, because I hadn't seen the challenge. So I thought they were doing Japanese Beatles and, roly-polies and stuff. I didn't know what they were doing. And they were all making Beatles songs. And she said she had one that was abandoned. And one of my friends said, you should do one, Susanne. And I said, oh, I probably couldn't do that. And she said, oh, you could do this one. This one is Rain. And I thought, well, all of a sudden I have an idea. So that's how I got into art quilting. And by the time that book came out, I was very hooked.
That's great. Well, then, and then you moved kind of into creating these exhibits and authoring and curating the exhibits. How did you get into that?
Well, my husband is one of my biggest supporters and encouragers. And we were watching the news on July 20th. It would have been 2014. And that was the 45th anniversary of the moonwalk. And so we were talking about, where was I and what were you doing, and going down memory lane. And I said, oh, the 50th anniversary would be such a cool thing to honor with a collection of quilts. And my husband said, you should do that. And I was like, do what? He said, you should put the call out for a collection of quilts. And I thought, I do not know how to do that. But I did know Donna from her Inspired by the Beatles book. And by then was probably working on my inspired by the national parks pieces for her. And so she was working with Schiffer Publishing. So I went on their website and I filled out in about 30 minutes. I designed the whole book. I was just kind of really inspired. And I filled out the form, and then I waited. And I think I filled it out in July, and I think they got back to me in October and said, yes, we want to do this. Well, I had promised them 90 to 130 quilts. And here's the thing, I didn't have any. I thought, oh, dear God, what's going to happen if I can't come up with these? So Donna DeSoto and Mary Kerr were so kind to share my mailing, my call, with the friends that they had that had been in their collections. And then I put it on Facebook, and I went in just about every Facebook group I could find that had quilting in the title and put the calls out there. I got kicked out of some groups because I wasn't supposed to be doing that. It wasn't according to their rules. But it went global. So in Fly Me to the Moon, we had artists from 8 countries, as far away as New Zealand and Australia. And then in Europe, we had the UK, Germany, the Netherlands, Spain, and then, of course, the United States and Canada.
That's amazing.
It was
amazing. Before we go into talking a little bit more about Fly Me to the Moon and some of the other exhibits that you've done, can you tell me a little bit about the process of like creating and then curating an exhibition like this?
Well, the first thing you do is put out the call, and you hope it resonates with people. And so far, I've been very lucky in the fact that it has. The whole thing for me, especially with Fly Me to the Moon, was a learning curve because I didn't know how to put out the call. I didn't know how to receive the quilts, how to ship the quilts, how to send out the acceptance and the awful rejection letters. That's my least favorite part. I don't like to reject. But I did some things that I was pleased that I did. I always had a jury, 2 jurors. I had Lisa Ellis, since I was so lucky as to be her friend, and then Cindy Zakis also juried for me. And my husband did my photography, and I've been very fortunate to have all 3 of the shows go to Houston. I've had all 3 of the shows at the National Quilt Museum. And then I've had a lot of showings with Mancuso, which has been very wonderful. And you always handle the quilts so beautifully, and they always come back in just pristine shape. So I'm always glad to work with you.
Well, thank you so much. And we always have enjoyed, since that Fly Me to the Moon exhibit, presenting your quilts. And of course, we've done some mostly in person, but as we are here now in the virtual quilt festival times, is that we also have shown the quilts, at our virtual shows, yes, which we're so happy to have. We're going to move on to talking a little bit about the Fly Me to the Moon exhibit and the kind of entries that you got. We have 3 quilts that you sent me that you wanted to highlight. One specifically was one that you created, Connect to the Moon. Tell me a little bit about that one.
As I was growing up, my grandmother, my mother's mother, would tell me about World War I. She and my grandfather were engaged, and she was in Alabama, and he was sent to France and stationed there it was right at the end of the war. And he kind of, as I understand it from my uncle, he was there at the end of the war, but then because there was an outbreak of some sort of a disease, they couldn't send them right home. So he was there, I think maybe 6 to 9 months, something like that. And of course, they didn't have texting, they didn't have cell phones. So before they left, they decided that every night at a certain time, they would both look at the moon and they would be connected. And so the piece that I made shows my grandmother in Alabama, and that's not a World War I soldier costume, but artistic license. And that's him in France, and they're both looking at the moon.
That's such a special story. Oh my gosh.
Love it. Yeah, I love it. And I took it to show the quilt to my uncle, And I said, I'm not even sure if this is true. I said, but I made the quilt anyway. And he said, I know what you're going to show me. And I said, what do you think it is? He said, it's my mom, my mother, and my daddy looking at the moon when he was in France. And I said, exactly right. So it must be true.
So nice.
'Cause
Yeah, that is such a great story.
Thanks.
And so nice that you were able to capture that in a quilt and in an exhibition that was, celebrating, such an amazing, feat for the Americans, the first landing on the moon.
And for mankind in general.
That's right. So there's another one, Last Quarter Moon, and that was made by Ricky Selva. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yes, that one drew so much attention when it would be hanging in an exhibit, because people would go up to it and I would hear them saying, oh, well, that's a photograph. Somebody just printed a photograph. It took Ricky 3 months for her to paint and ink and do everything that she did to that to get the moon looking exactly right. And then, of course, she did stitching. But the fact that it took her 3 months to paint it that way and with such accuracy that people thought it was a photograph, I just think it's a remarkable piece.
That is amazing. And it is such a beautiful quilt. And then the last one from that exhibit is Godspeed, July 16th, 1969. And that's by Denise Courier.
This is one of those that just makes me smile, because what she's done is shown the crowd watching the launch as we were leaving to go to the moon. And there in the crowd are President Johnson and Lady Bird Johnson, and they are part of the crowd watching. And then she has taken and made the rocket going over their heads, which what she's done is put 2 pictures kind of together, because they're looking over there and the rocket is actually out of the picture and she's put it in. And I just love that picture, and the joy on everyone's faces, and the fact that they are part of the crowd. They're not set apart from it, and they're enjoying it with all the rest of the Americans that are so amazed.
That's amazing. This is a great quilt. In fact, all of the quilts in the collection are amazing, but thank you so much for sharing these 3.
You're welcome.
With the HERstory exhibit, and Susanne, what's the full title of HERstory?
HERstory Quilts, Human Rights Stories in Fabric. And that's the 3rd of my exhibits. It actually, HERstory was another one of my ideas. This one was an idea of one of the artists that had been in Fly Me to the Moon. After the 2016 election, she contacted me and she said, I believe that we need to make quilts about human rights, to celebrate them, to call attention to them, to protect them. And
that's great.
And so I thought, well, I thought I was done. I really wasn't planning to do another collection there. But on Inauguration Day, 2017, I issued the call for HERstory. It is the smallest of the collections, because at the very same time, another call went out called Threads of Resistance. And I'm sure you've had some of those at your shows as well. They're wonderful quilts. And that one drew such a large outpouring of artistic talent and pieces that I ended up with a smaller group. But I am so proud of this collection. HERstory is just an amazing collection. We did not limit any rights. So whoever wanted to put something in, we didn't look at it and say, oh, no, we are not doing that group's rights. So it's, it was totally on artistic merit, whether they got in or not.
Well, that's amazing. And definitely this collection is one of my favorites. The first quilt that we're showing is Colorblind by Mary Jane Sneed. Can you just tell us a little bit about that? She's from New Zealand.
She is, and we were blessed in 2019 to visit she and her husband in their home in Dunedin. Mary Jane lives in New Zealand, but she and her family, when she was a little girl, lived in Tennessee. And it was her sister's birthday. And being from New Zealand, her mother was not as apt as some other folks in Tennessee to segregate the birthday parties. So she had invited the classmates. She had also invited the children of the lady that cleaned her house, who happened to be the best friend of Mary Jane's younger sister. And what you see in that picture is her little sister, whose birthday it was, and her best friend embracing and hugging each other. I almost feel like that picture represents the whole spirit of our story. Yeah. They didn't see color. They just saw the friend that they dearly loved.
It definitely is one of my favorite quilts. And, you know, every time I see it, it reminds me of the, you know, what you put forth in this exhibit and what kind of message you were portraying, which was wonderful.
Thank you.
So the other one is Suffrage, Long Denied by Yourself. Tell us a little bit about what the concept behind that was.
This is my paternal grandmother's story, and it's a story I've wanted to tell for a long time. And I originally thought I might write a children's book about it, but I decided that visually it was a good one to tell. So we have to start like up in the upper left-hand corner with the map of South Dakota. She was born in the South Dakota Territory in 1888. And so, of course, nobody in her family could vote until it became a state. And once it did, only the men could vote. And my grandmother became a door-to-door salesperson for Singer sewing machines and moved away from South Dakota and ended up meeting my grandfather, who was from England. And they got married in West Virginia. And my grandmother married my grandfather during an expatriation act of 1907, which was still in effect when they married in 1920. And my grandmother lost her American citizenship as a result of marrying my grandfather. She didn't know that was going to happen to her, especially since women had just gotten the right to vote. And here she marries him, so she can't vote. So then the next year, my father was born in Ohio, and all three of them became naturalized. And and that was good, except that the next place they moved was Washington, D.C. And until 1964, you could not vote if you lived in Washington, D.C. So here's my grandmother, 1964, her husband has died. She's now a grandmother. She still can't vote. She moves to Maryland and thought she'd be able to vote there, but she'd moved to a district too late to register to vote for that election. And again, she moved in 1968, again, too close to the election. So she was able to vote for her first and only time in 1972. And that was my first time voting. She was 84, I was 19.
That's incredible and horrible at the same time.
Yes, I'm so glad she got to vote, but it's awful to think. And everybody that I've ever met and told that story to before I found out about the Expatriation Act, would even, including lawyers who had studied many years, would say to me, that didn't happen. And I would say, I've got my dad's naturalization papers to prove it. I know it happened because my grandmother was never out of the United States.
Wow, that's amazing. That's amazing. Well, thank you for telling us about that. That's a great story. The last quilt that we have featured for our story is April 27, 1994, The Mandela Votes, and that is by Margaret Williams. Can you tell us briefly about that one?
I can. I put that kind of in as another voting one next to the one about my grandmother, because it's such a strong piece. Mandela was so proud to be able to cast his own ballot because apartheid had just ended. And of course, he's casting his ballot for himself for president. But at the time, Margaret Williams lives in Georgia, and at their church, there was a young man that had come from South Africa to study, and the church was sponsoring him. And so she remembered, as she was making that piece about Mandela, how important it was to him to vote for Mandela. And of course, he had to do it months in advance to get his ballot back to South Africa. And she tells the story of him dressing up in his Sunday best to take his ballot to the post office because it was so important. So, you know, 3 voting stories there kind of meshed together with my grandmother and Mandela and the young man that was studying.
Well, that's great. Well, there definitely, that collection is beautiful, and we've very much enjoyed showing it to our attendees. So the collection that we have showing at our Spring Quilt Festival online right now is HERstory, and we have a couple of quilts from that collection to show you here. Susanne, can you tell us a little bit about the HERstory collection and
Sure.
how you thought how that came?
Well, that collection, the call went out in 2016 during Women's History Month. And at that time, we thought there was going to be a female candidate. We didn't know for sure that Hillary Clinton would be the candidate for president. But as the call went out and the quilts were made, we thought that it was going to be kind of a celebratory collection of all the amazing things women had ever done. And of course, in a twist of fate, that she did not win. But it still was a great opportunity to look at all the things women had done. So I gave them the parameters of it being anything that a woman had done that was groundbreaking since 1920. And so they had to register with me before they made their pieces, because I didn't want them to make a piece about, let's say Marilyn Monroe was their favorite actress, and they wanted to make a piece about Marilyn Monroe. Well, this was not that type of a collection. This was a collection of amazing accomplishments. Well, you might say, well, there's a picture about Betty White in there. Well, Betty White was the first female television producer. So they had to have something like that. And it was a really interesting thing to get the whole list of women. And of course, there are so many that we should have made that we didn't make, or that just didn't get juried in. And I do wish that we had a piece about Ruth Bader Ginsburg. We do not, but we do have some other wonderful ones that I'd love to tell you about.
Well, that's great. Yes, this is another one of my favorite collections. Of course, just looking through all of the quilts, of all these amazing women, it's just so inspiring. We have a few. Yes, so the first is the Frida Kahlo, which is done by Maricela Rumberg.
Yes. And of course, Frida Kahlo was just an amazing artist, and also did a lot of her painting when she was laying on her back in bed. I mean, she was just an amazing artist. And Maricela is actually from Mexico, and she really enjoyed making this piece, and it looks so much like Frida, but also has Maricela's Zentangle that she loves to teach. So I love that piece, and it's painted as well as stitched. So it's a good example of the different media that have come into play in fiber art now. It's not just all stitching and buttons and fabric and thread.
That's right. We love to celebrate all those different kinds of textile arts for sure. The next one is the Nina, a theme with variations, and that's from Sherry Culver.
And this one is Nina Simone. She was quite active during the civil rights movement. And so you see on her wall there a picture of Martin Luther King and a picture of Malcolm X. And she's got the music all over the floor and the microphone in her hand, and the textures and the colors in that piece just knock my socks off. It is so intricately done and so expertly done.
It is. I agree, for sure. And then the last one is such a great person, Aretha, and that's by Jean Knudsen.
I had to do that because my husband and I just finished watching the series that has been on Nat Geo this past week about Aretha, and it went from when she was a little girl until when she was much older. And so when I was looking through the pictures and thinking about who I wanted to put up there as outstanding women, I was like, well, I just have to do Aretha because she was just so great. And her claim to fame was that she was the first female in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, which is really interesting because she's the queen of soul, and so, but you look at all the women that have done rock, and she was the very first one, which tells you a lot about how they were leaving us out, because it was a while before she was in there. So.
Right. Well, that's amazing. And that's right where she belongs for sure.
Absolutely.
So are there any future collections?
If I were to do another collection, I think it would probably be HERstory Part 2. Mm-hmm. I kind of think we need Ruth in there and Kamala in there and some of the other women that have come along that, I'd still like to see Katherine Johnson from the Hidden Figures. Mm-hmm. But that being said, I don't have plans to do one right away. I'd like to work on my own art. When people know me, they know me because I've curated these exhibits, which is wonderful. And I have loved every minute of getting a chance to make sure that other artists' work was seen. Mm-hmm. I'm an encourager by nature, and I have loved sharing their work with people. I would like, though, to work on my own art a while. And we are getting older, and the boxes that we have to ship are quite heavy. And Mancuso is one of the shows that sends a pickup, but not all the shows do. So there's a lot of shows where my husband and I have to load up the car. And I should just say my husband because I really can't load up the car. But I also have to watch out for his back and that kind of thing. So for right now, I think I'm enjoying working, and we moved during the pandemic, and I have the whole bottom floor of my house is my studio. So I'm kind of enjoying making my own stuff.
And there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. You should definitely make time for your own art, and perhaps maybe one day we'll have a Susanne Jones one-woman show exhibition at our shows.
Oh, well, my goodness, that would be very nice.
We'll have to talk about that later.
All right.
So just to wrap up, what is your favorite quilting tool that you can't live without?
I've been thinking about this since you sent me a list of the questions. I guess I would have to say it's my Bernina 790 Plus because it can do so much, and I enjoy the embroidery module, and I often will put a component of an embroidery of some kind into my artwork. So I enjoy that. I also love my Karen K. Buckley Perfect Scissors. I can't live without that. So I'll put that in and give Karen a little boost.
Well, that's great. Who knows, that can inspire a lot of people to go out and try the Bernina machine and check out the Karen K. Buckley scissors.
Exactly.
Thank you so much, Susanne. I really appreciate you coming on with me today. It's been just an awesome time talking about these great quilts.
Well, thanks for having me. I've enjoyed it too. Have a great rest of the spring and enjoy the flowers and stay healthy.
Thank you. You too. I hope you enjoyed that interview as much as I did. Thank you, Susanne, so much for allowing us to display your quilts, your curated quilts at our Spring Quilt Festival online. Again, if you want to see those quilts, everybody, they are on our website, onlinequiltfestival.com, under special exhibits, and that's HERstory. Stay tuned. Next up at 12:30 is Artisan Space. See you then.